In those days, one gucht could exceed one house in worth. In the early 17th century, the Dutch Republic was the hub of global trading. Dutch ships sailed across all the world's oceans. Dutch money supported kings. Dutch financial markets and markets of insurance were the most developed ones in the world.
It was no primitive and foolish culture. It may have been the most developed financially, and it was here, within a community of dedicated traders, bookkeepers, and investors, that one of the most notorious speculations of all time, Tulip Mania, took place. The tulip was not indigenous to the Netherlands. They were imported by the Dutch from the Ottoman Empire during the end of the 16th century. It was not their rarity, but the unpredictability of the tulip that set it apart. Some types had a flame effect, which was created by a mosaic virus. The broken tulips had streaks of red, purple, and white, impossible colors to reproduce. Each one was distinct. This unpredictability would prove to be an ingredient for speedy financial transactions. To begin with, tulips were exclusive objects of curiosity, grown by botanists and aristocrats. Tulips were symbols of prestige, and they were grown in private gardens and swapped among the elite. However, as more and more people showed interest in them, the market developed. The price appreciated consistently and then surged. A collector's item market transformed into an investment class. The Dutch economy was full of potential for speculation. The Republic had a sizable and rich middle class with money to spare. The economy also had well-developed capital markets, a strong contract law system, and a culture that accepted trade and risk-taking. Futures markets for grains and commodities were already established. The practice of short selling was also common. Credit instruments were widely used. Under such conditions, tulips did not appear to be out of place. They were just another commodity, small, light, scarce, and coveted. While tulip bulbs themselves may have remained a luxurious item, it was the introduction of forward contracts that actually turned them into investment objects. People started to trade contracts for delivery of the bulbs in the future, usually after the end of the planting season. Speculation could be conducted not physically, but using the bulb as an object of investment. All this happened with little initial capital. Such transactions were also common in taverns and not in normal markets. Those involved included professional traders, craftsmen, seafarers, and agricultural workers. Trading in tulips became a social activity. Business transactions were concluded with wine and shaking hands. Prices were conveyed by rumor. Gains were publicized faster than facts. And so, fueled by its own momentum, the price shed any relation to actual value. Exotic bulbs were given names and nicknames. One bulb of the Semper Augustus variety was reportedly sold for a price that could buy a large Amsterdam house. How much of these stories is exactly true is less interesting than the point that the price of tulips was driven to a point where the only rationale was that the purchaser could sell it to someone else for an even higher price the next day. This is the defining characteristic of a speculative bubble. Tulip mania was not a result of lack of knowledge. Tulip mania was a result of expectations. The speculators looked forward to a continued rise in prices because they had already gone up. They looked forward to an increase in demand due to publicity about profit-taking by others. They looked forward to scarcity as a guarantee of value. They looked forward to a time when they could get out before a crash. The nature of the contracts heightened the stakes. The presence of escape clauses on most contracts gave potential buyers the right to walk away from their contracts by paying a termination fee. This made the contracts more akin to options than guarantees. The risks seemed small. The potential rewards seemed infinite. Then, by late 1636, the tulip trade skyrocketed. Bulbs were exchanged several times before they were even dug out of the soil. The trade spectrum continued to move away from the tangible and into the abstract. The volume of trade picked up. Peer pressure mounted. Not trading seemed to amount to folly. Then, confidence turned in early 1637. In an auction in Haarlem, the buyers did not turn up. The prices did not go higher. They just stalled. That in itself was reason enough. As long as the prospect of endless escalation was undermined, the apparent logic was turned upside down. Sellers hurried to get out, and the buyers stayed away. The prices tumbled swiftly. Contracts were not settled. There were lawsuits.
Appeals were directed to the government. Mediation efforts were made by the government to permit the contract to expire for a small fee. This basically legalized default. The market failed. Paradoxically, contrary to popular legend, the Dutch economy did not fail catastrophically. Banks did not go belly up by the hundreds, if not thousands. Trade did not grind to a complete halt. What Tulip Mania did accomplish, if it accomplished anything at all, concerned psychological rather than financial revelation. The Tulip Mania period exposed the fact that even the most evolved financial structures remain susceptible to story-based speculations. This phenomenon indicated that prices could become delinked from their intrinsic values once and for all under the reign of anticipations and expectations. Later generations would come to mythologize the Tulip Mania as madness. It was portrayed as mass insanity, a mythological example of foolishness. But this is not an appropriate perspective. There was nothing irrational at the time. It was completely logical behavior in response to incentives and information. It is the irrational system.
In terms of financial history, Tulip Mania is important because it is one of the first recorded asset bubbles fueled by derivative transactions. The use of forward contracts, leverage, and limited liability turned a flower into an abstraction. This would be a pattern that would be repeated throughout the course of centuries with stocks, real estate, commodities, and cryptocurrencies. The analogies to our current markets are more than a little disturbing. In the late 1990s, unprofitable .com companies reached spectacular valuations on merit of future prospects. In the mid-2000s, residential property prices surged on expectations that, under no circumstances, their values would ever decline across the country. Now, in the 2020s, emerging new asset classes such as cryptocurrencies or AI stocks are sparking renewed discussion on this topic.
A fall in liquidity spells the death of bubbles. Liquidity of exit is required. Tulip Mania also exemplifies how the role of social context affects financial activities. The fact that trading took place in bars removes any possible distinction between business and fun activities. Social reinforcement took the place of financial analysis, and the financial market became some sort of performance. Crucially, Tulip Mania was not all in vain. Tulips still retained their intrinsic beauty. Tulips continued to be cultivated and appreciated long after the financial crash. It was not the thing that popped, it was its price potential that was stripped of its worth. This is important. Assets do not lose all value at the end of a bubble. They are revalued. This had a huge impact on the views and perceptions of the Dutch regarding speculation. Excesses were frowned upon by moralists. Tulips were employed by writers as symbols of vanity. Regulators were cautious. However, speculation did not vanish. It took on other forms. There is a financial history here, one that shows bubbles are not exceptional events. They are characteristics of systems where capital, innovation, and psychology come into play. Tulip Mania is part of this history, not an exception. It is easy to think that modern markets are safe because of better data and greater transparency, but there was a Tulip Mania in a civilization that also believed that about themselves. Sophistication does not cancel out bubbles. It speeds them up. The broader teaching has to do with belief. Markets are belief aggregates. A system becomes unstable when belief becomes self-referential, when higher prices justify higher prices. That is precisely what happens in Tulip Mania. The situation provides a perfect example of speculative mechanics, which does not involve the complications of contemporary derivatives. There were no central banks to regulate interest rates, no international monetary policy, and no electronic trading systems. Nevertheless, the essence is the same. This continuity over the centuries indicates a deep truth. Markets are social structures before they are mathematical structures. They express fear, greed, hope, and imitation, no less than supply and demand. Tulip Mania is remembered not because it was a singular event, but because it was one of the earliest. It makes a clean mirror through which succeeding generations can view themselves. Succeeding generations always think that their values are different, that their innovations are revolutionary, that their reasoning is good. Each generation produces its tulips. Learning about Tulip Mania is not about poking fun at history. It is about recognizing the patterns that reappear any time new investments are subjected to an abundance of liquidity and the optimism that derives from it.
The flower itself is irrelevant. Patterns are timeless. Financial history is not a linear process. It is a cycle of confidence and collapse. Tulip Mania is one of the first recorded heights of that cycle. Not the cost of a bulb, but the realization that markets can create belief faster than value, and that collapse begins when belief wavers. Thus, Tulip Mania was in no way a failure in flowers. It was an insight into finance itself. It appears that for Tulip Mania, a bubble is always pegged not by the weirdness of the good itself, but by the action surrounding it. A bulb, stock, or token may all perform the same role when enough people are in agreement regarding an inevitable map towards appreciation. Another major insight is the liquidity level. Tulip prices escalated during a situation of high liquidity. The Dutch Republic had an excess of capital from trade.